So welcome to the Cup with Joe podcast. I'm very excited about the guest that we have on today, Attorney Michael Sterling. He's also my classmate in the 100 Black Men of Atlanta. Didn't get a chance to congratulate you on being inducted as well, brother. Welcome to the show, man.
Man, thank you for having me, and congratulations to you too. We've got a terrific class, a lot of lawyers.
Exactly. That's what makes it a great class too.
Right.
But yeah, just really quickly, just introduce yourself to everyone real quickly and tell them a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I'm Michael Sterling, senior, dad of three, husband. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas. Went to Morehouse College after graduating high school, which is sort of where I made my connection to Atlanta. Graduated from Morehouse and then Texas Southern University for law school. Began practicing general litigation, complex commercial class action defense at a big law firm, Sidley Austin in Chicago, Illinois. I was shortly thereafter, a few years after that, I was appointed as an assistant United States attorney and served for several years as a federal prosecutor in Chicago. Came back to Atlanta to be the senior advisor to the mayor. I did that for several years, and now I have my own practice, a litigation boutique law firm with my partner, David Dreyer, Dreyer Sterling, LLC, where we handle a variety of litigation concerns from breach of contract to criminal defense work to civil RICO claims to complex injury cases. So just a variety of litigation matters on behalf of our clients.
Awesome, Michael. I appreciate that introduction. And, I titled this episode Justice Delayed because, for so often, we see it all the time in the case of Black Americans where we either don't get justice at all or it's extremely delayed. And you mentioned, because you kind of had two perspectives on this. You were formerly an AUSA, you do criminal defense work as well. When you were working on behalf of the federal government, tell me more about kind of what you experienced, what you saw, and kind of how it opened your eyes up with respect to the criminal justice system as well, and the civil justice system as well.
Well, what I saw was the enormous power of individual prosecutors. It's incredible how much discretion and how much justice lays squarely on the shoulders and in the hands of prosecutors. They are the ones with the ultimate authority to hold, police in check, to hold, to determine what charges will be brought, to determine when a defendant deserves, mercy in many cases, So, sometimes people, ask me, well, how do you defend a guilty client? I said, well, sometimes it's not about the guilt. Sometimes it's about, this is a person who made a mistake. We may accept responsibility, but it's about sentence mitigation. Why are we disproportionately sentenced to larger time behind bars than our counterparts? And so being in AUSA, I was fortunate to work in a very progressive office under Patrick Fitzgerald, who didn't mind people speaking up when they saw something wrong. But I saw the enormous power of the office. I saw how much power rests in the hands of prosecutors, and I sought not to misuse that power. I had cases come before me. I can remember at least, 2 or 3 cases that came before me that I rejected from police officers because they had violated somebody's constitutional rights. They had violated the search and seizure laws. They had done something, and I was like, this is a violation of the law, and I'm not going to move forward with the case, and I'm certainly not going to hide your misdeeds so I can prosecute this case. And so but that's the kind of power, many prosecutors may have taken the case, but that's the kind of power you have to be able to hold police in check, because that's what the justice system is supposed to be about when you're a prosecutor. It's supposed to not be about winning cases. It's supposed to be about doing justice, doing the right things, making sure that you're upholding the law. And that the people who you work with, the investigators, the agents, the police officers, whoever, are upholding the law. And so I got, as an AUSA, I got to learn the tremendous, power of the office and the sacred responsibility that prosecutors are supposed to have.
Right. And wow, that was just eye-opening for me and made me think about in your experience, like, do a lot of these prosecutors, do you think they actually practice that and say, all right, I realize this cop may have done something wrong? And or do they just say, you know what, I'm all about winning. I'm all about prosecuting as many people as possible. Is there too much of that going on?
I think there's a lot of that going on, unfortunately. And I mean, unfortunately, a lot of politics comes into play, especially in states where the judges are elected, the DAs are elected. Um, there's a, and then and mayors run police departments, and so there's a lot of politics at play, a lot of pressure to win prosecutions in certain cases because of political ramifications. Um, but being a lawyer is supposed to be about more than that, right? We have an ethical and sacred responsibility when we step into the courtroom, depending on what side you're on, to do everything you can to represent your client zealously. And in the case of a prosecutor, a Supreme Court decision once said they're not just an ordinary lawyer or ordinary representative of a party, because they represent a sovereignty. They represent more than just an ordinary party. They represent the state. They represent the United States. They represent the government. And the government is supposed to be not just about trying to put somebody in jail, but it's supposed to be about trying to do justice. But I think that there's far too many instances of prosecutors wanting or desperately seeking to win cases and taking shortcuts or turns they aren't supposed to take in order to win a victory.
So you talk about, your civil litigation work in addition to your criminal defense work, and we've all heard horror stories about, Black people getting railroaded in our criminal justice system. Would you say, is that more of because of a race issue, or is it more of an economic issue? In other words, a lot of times, do we just not have the funds to have the adequate defense to a lot of these charges that are brought against us? I mean, what have you seen?
I mean, I think it starts from policing, right? I think our neighborhoods are grossly over policed. Black and brown neighborhoods are disproportionately over policed, right? We know the statistics, and the statistics could not be clear. The empirical evidence is there, right? White folks, Black folks do drugs, about the same rate. Black folks spend more time in jail for it. I mean, that's not an arguable statistic. A Black man is 6 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted for murder, right? That's not an arguable, that's empirical data, right? So we know that Black folks are over policed, often disproportionately wrongfully convicted of crimes they didn't commit. So I would say that race does play a major factor. Don't get me wrong. Economics plays a factor in terms of whether you can hire the appropriate counsel, have the resources necessary to marshal your defense. There are cases where people can barely hire me, and so when I go to them and say, well, we need an expert and we need an investigator and we need this, they're like, I don't have the resources to do it, and so I have to figure out a way to make it happen. With the resources that they have. But I think it's very clear that from the policing perspective, because police are the ones who make the cases and bring them to the state's attorney, to the district attorney, the agents make the cases, bring them to the federal prosecutors. And I think it starts with policing. And so because because communities of color are disproportionately policed, you end up with more individuals, sitting at the defendant's table in a court of law.
And to play devil's advocate, because I completely agree with respect to that data. The folks on the other side will say, well, there's just more crime, period, even outside of the drugs in these communities. So that's why we need police in those particular communities, or need more police in those particular communities. Kind of, what would you say to that?
I would say, well, tell me what your definition of crime is. There isn't more embezzlement and extortion happening in those communities. There isn't more aggravated identity theft happening in those communities. There isn't more credit card fraud happening in those communities. What they're saying is there's more. What they're basically saying is, and all the statistics they rely on go back to arrest data, right? So when you look at statistics outside of just, arrest data, conviction data, when you look at who uses drugs, like what percentage of the population uses drugs, and then break it down by demographic. There isn't more of that happening in Black and brown communities than there are in other communities. Maybe different types of drugs, right? Maybe cheaper types of drugs, but there's not a big difference, but in terms of the drug usage. So I mean, my response to that is it's just simply not true. There's no empirical data. I don't believe that shores up that there's disproportionate crime. Now, if you want to target a specific caliber of crime, then we can have a conversation about how poverty leads to other desperate crimes such as robbery and burglaries and things like that. But people are getting burglarized through white collar crimes. Nobody just running up in your house, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you're still getting your money. I mean, who's the
It's worse. It's more money.
Bernie Madoff is the biggest thief in the history of the country, right? I mean, he stole billions of dollars from people, right? I mean, this isn't somebody running up in your house to take your TV. This is somebody trying to rob you of your livelihood and ability to provide for your family forever, right? I mean, there's not a worse thief than that.
Not in the history of the world, probably not just this country. That's a great point. So I want to transition a little bit because as we record this podcast, the George Floyd, well, let me back up and not say the George Floyd trial. Let me correct myself. The Derek Chauvin trial is going on. His murder trial is going on right now. And I think it's a clear case of murder. But again, playing devil's advocate from a criminal defense perspective, do they have any legitimate defenses to what he did in this case and the charges that have been brought?
They do. And I was just reading, that's not to say I agree with the defense, but I was just reading a article from a law professor from Berkeley who said, unfortunately, police defense cases are just tougher to get a conviction because you don't look at it from if it were you or I who had our knee on George Floyd's neck in that manner, and we had him with his hands behind his back and did that, easy conviction. We wouldn't have a chance, right? We wouldn't have a chance in court. But because it's a police officer, society has shown has been deferential to police officers, have given them the benefit of the doubt, the benefit of their badge to say that they were acting within the scope of their responsibility in trying to stop some sort of crime from happening. And then you have people who make excuses. Well, if he wouldn't have resisted, or if he wouldn't have fought back, if he would have just got in the car and did what they said do, then the officer never would have had to use that force. So maybe he was justified in using that force. And then the question becomes, well, and if he did use it and he used it for too long, maybe that wasn't intentional. It wasn't an intentional act. Maybe it was just a mistake and it happened in the heat of the moment. And you have to view it in light of a reasonable police officer. So you and I are probably on the same page on this. We think it's a clear-cut case of murder. We think it's very obvious. I think the prosecution is doing a terrific job of walking this case down. But the defense still has their case in chief, right? They're going to bring expert witnesses who are going to say his force wasn't excessive, and then in criminal cases in general, prosecutions have the burden. You have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So all you have to do is raise the specter of doubt, raise the specter of reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. So while we may look at the video and say this is clear cut, remember the burden is on the prosecution beyond a reasonable doubt. So all he's got to do is convince one juror, that there's some reason to be doubtful about the murder conviction.
I'm praying for this country because if there's an acquittal, I mean, we understand that from a legal perspective, how they could create that doubt. But the average everyday American, if there's an acquittal on this case,
I can't imagine what's going to happen. I certainly wouldn't want to be one of the people sitting in that jury box with that kind of pressure, because it's one of those things where it's like you can't. You know what's going on, right? You're trying to do exactly what the judge says. You're trying to follow the law, the instructions, not bring any bias, preconceived notions. But you also know that there's a huge responsibility on your shoulder that could result in the country catching fire if there is an acquittal. So that's not avoidable. Unfortunately, they are aware of that reality.
On top of that, they're trying to hide their identity right now, but we all know the media is going to find out who was on that.
Absolutely. It's only a matter of time, right?
So let's end with talking about Courtney Rainey.
Okay.
I saw your post and it really moved me when you were discussing her case. And this was a case that you worked on in Mississippi. So just first and foremost, who is Courtney Rainey?
So Courtney Rainey is a voting advocate out of Canton, Mississippi. And if you're not familiar with Canton, it's the scene from A Time to Kill. So if you think about the movie A Time to Kill, that took place in Canton, Mississippi. And so Courtney Rainey grew up in Canton, lived in Canton her whole life. She is one of those people who is a regular advocate of one of those GOTV people who encourages people to get out to vote. And she does it every election cycle. She's been hired by white and black politicians alike to try to get more people out to vote. And then she also sits on the school board. She is also a member of the Canton school board. And so she sat on the school board, and then she's a mother of a 12-year-old. And I mean, that's who Courtney Rainey is. She's a big, she's really big in the community up there. She's really a dedicated community servant and public servant. And I got the chance to really, really get to know her over these last 2 years.
How did you get involved in this case?
So Courtney called me. For some reason, I keep getting called back to Mississippi. So I took one case in Mississippi back in 2017, where I defended the district attorney in Hinds County, Mississippi. And I handled two cases for him. One was in Hinds County, one was in Rankin County. Now, Hinds County is where Jackson, Mississippi is the capital. It's about an 80% African-American county. And so, we won an acquittal there. And then they prosecuted him on a separate case that was even older than the one they prosecuted him on in Hinds County, but they went to Rankin County to do it. Now, Rankin County is on the outside of Jackson. It's about 90 plus percent white, and about 85% of that county voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And so they were prosecuting him in a case where they were claiming he had assaulted this white woman. So it was a clear cut, like, I know what you're trying to do. And initially he wasn't going to hire me because he wasn't sure I'd play well in a county like that. Then he ends up hiring me for this second trial, and I was able to get him an acquittal in that case as well, with an all-white jury. And so Courtney was facing a similar situation. She was being prosecuted in Madison County, which is adjacent to Rankin. They have the same judges for both, basically sits for both counties. And so she called me and said, I saw what you did for Robert Smith. She was like, I'd like to retain you in my case. And so she retained me. And then I brought on one of my good friends who works regularly in Mississippi, who's a lawyer based out of Mississippi.
Well, trial lawyer to trial lawyer, first and foremost, man, kudos to you, because that's a big deal. Folks don't really understand trying cases is difficult. And then under those circumstances in those venues, it puts it just through the roof as far as difficulty.
I tell my class, I teach a class at Texas Southern. I tell my class, being a trial lawyer is like being a brain surgeon. I was like, you've got to make moment to moment decisions that can impact somebody's life. And your ability to be at your sharpest in a courtroom from moment to moment, from case to case, and you've got to think about, you've got to analyze something in a matter of a millisecond that can potentially, that appeals courts might write about after thinking about it for several months. Yeah. So being a trial lawyer is like being it's very, it's just difficult to me. I've never been a brain surgeon, but I imagine that, the precise and precision and the things you have to think about, knowing that what you do from moment to moment can change somebody's life drastically.
In addition, you might be in trial for weeks doing this, and you're depleted when it's done. I mean, I'm exhausted after a 2-day trial, so I imagine a week-long trial is ridiculous.
Right.
So what did they charge Courtney with?
So the way they did these charges are, they charged her with about 8 to 10 counts of voter fraud, ranging from different things, from She was registering someone she knew to vote. She saw them. They registered to vote. When they were done, she said, "Hey, what are you guys drinking?" And they said, "Oh, we just had a couple of beers." She said, "All right, well, I'll buy y'all a round of beers." She didn't tell them who to vote for. Didn't tell them, "Hey, if you vote, I'll give you a beer." It was like she was registering people to vote, ran into somebody she knew, offered them a drink. So they charged her with basically paying them to be registered to vote. Then they charged her with witness intimidation, which is the only thing she was ever convicted of. They basically said that she intimidated this witness. One of the witnesses, basically had come forward and said, "Well, Courtney was offering us money." That later turns out that it wasn't true. She just offered them the beer. And then Courtney went to the witness and said, "Hey, you got to go to the police and tell them the truth, that I didn't offer you any money." The witness ultimately does tell them the truth, but they charged Courtney with witness intimidation for going to that witness to tell her to go to the police and tell them the truth.
Oh my God. So, I mean, after hearing that, and I'm sure when you first reviewed this evidence, I mean, did the first thing come to your mind is, okay, this is a witch hunt?
Definitely. I mean, just looking at the way they prosecuted the case, I was like, this isn't voter fraud. Like, this isn't somebody paying people to vote. Just the facts and circumstances. I just thought it was a really awkward case, and it was clear to me that that I was about to step into some political landmines in rural Mississippi, and that I better be prepared, because it was clear to me that there was something larger at play with Courtney Rainey's case. It just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to us.
And you said you better be prepared for that. What did you ultimately have to be prepared for? Like, what did you have to encounter, man?
My temperament, making sure that I never lost sight of the fact that Courtney was the client and I needed to keep my temperament under control. I was treated very horribly by the judge in that case. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Thurgood, but he kind of, like, because I was pro hoc visa, he kind of did me like the judge in that movie did. He wouldn't let me say anything or talk until after they had decided which cases they were going to move forward with first, and then only then would he admit me only for that specific case. So he basically set me down, even though there was an agreement previously that I could be admitted for all of the cases since they were all related. He tried to force us to try them all together. And so basically it was either y'all try them all together, or I'm only going to admit Mr. Sterling for one specific case, and I'm not going to do it until we're about to go to trial. So it was being treated like that. There was one point in the case where somebody accused some random person who, is like one of these detractors in the community, accused me and my law partner of talking to one of the black jurors. I'd never met this juror before, never seen him before in my life. So the judge calls the guy in, puts him on the witness stand, swears him in, and the guy says, "Yeah, I saw the defense attorneys talking to this juror, one of the few black jurors." And I asked her, so I cross-examined the guy, and I say, "Well, which one of us was it?" I was like, "If you saw one of us talking to him, who was it?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't remember." Well, I'm 6'2" and light skinned. My law partner was 5'8" and brown skinned, and he's shorter, a little bigger than me. I'm tall, a little thinner. And so I was like, you can't tell the difference between us two? I mean, and then my law partner tell the judge, we're officers of the court. Both of us former federal prosecutors. We never talked to this juror. The juror took the stand in front of the judge, said, "I never talked to these men." The judge dismissed them and said, "I'm not aspersion. I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on what anybody said, but the fact that this has even been raised, I think I have to dismiss this juror out of an abundance of caution." I'm like, You are casting an aspersion then. Because every all told you we never met, we never talked to this guy. And it was one of the few black jurors. He was literally the first black juror. And it was in a pool where there wasn't many black. So it was those kind of things, Joe, where I knew I had to be prepared. I knew what time it was. Like, I knew exactly what was going on. I was like, this is a witch hunt. This is a setup. They're mad about me getting the DA off already in Rankin County. They see me coming back, and they're going to try to stack the deck against me even more than they did the last time.
You know what I would love, man? I would love if there was some recording or something, because there were some conversations about you, your law partner. I mean, there was some things said, and this was a plan. I mean, because when you think about they're gonna dismiss one of the only black jurors, are we in 1953 or something?
Right.
Like, where are we?
And when we were picking the jury, the prosecution came back with such detailed information about the jurors that wasn't made available publicly. We got the jury list the day of, right before the jury came in. They knew this juror lives in your client's district. Wait, y'all were able to do that research in 30 minutes? Y'all had to have had this jury. Like, come on, that's not possible. It was things like that. I was like, wait a minute, how do y'all know all of this? They were like, when we pulled their Facebook page, y'all were able to do that in 30 minutes.
Please.
I mean, my God, it was incredible. So I could tell that there were things going on, certainly behind the scenes, and I'm not a part of that network. So I knew what time it was.
Wow. So ultimately, what happened with that case? What was the resolution of it for her?
So interestingly, after direct examination and cross-examination and the state resting their case, me and my law partner looked at each other and said, the intimidation has got to be gone. It's a directed verdict. I mean, the witness said she didn't intimidate me. She never intimidated me. She only told me to tell the truth. And the statute required that you attempt to intimidate a witness in order to get them to tell a lie. And so we were like, well, that's got to be gone. We moved for directed verdict. The judge didn't get rid of it. The jury is hung on the jury gets hung on the voter fraud. They convict her on the voter intimidation, on the intimidation of a witness. So the judge sentences Courtney to 15 years, 12 to serve on the witness intimidation based on the facts I just shared with you. We believe we had a really good grounds for appeal, both at the state level and at the state. We believe we had a really good federal issue of her First Amendment right. Of an as applied challenge related to her First Amendment right to be able to talk to someone and tell them to tell the truth without fear of being accused of witness intimidation. But luckily, the Court of Appeals reversed the conviction, saying no reasonable juror, based on the testimony of that witness, could have convicted her beyond a reasonable doubt. They are now appealing, so our client is still not free. They're now appealing they're asking for reconsideration and then planning an appeal, asking for cert to the Mississippi Supreme Court. So we're still fighting for her freedom.
So she's still in jail, and how long has she been in jail?
She's been in a little over about a year and a half.
It's just frustrating to me that this can still happen to us. If you're in the wrong place and it feels like if they want you, they're gonna get you. And right. I know a lot of black people feel that way, especially when it comes to the government, unfortunately. So yeah. What do we do? I mean, moving forward, and this is kind of to wrap up, like, what do we kind of do moving forward with all of these things hanging over our head, knowing that that's the scenario that we're in as Black Americans, unfortunately?
I mean, I think we got to keep doing what you and I do every day, Joe, which is, fighting for folks. I mean, everybody, you carry your cup of water, you carry your baton to as long as you can, and then we pass it to whoever's coming after us. To the law students that I teach at Texas Southern, I'm gonna carry this torch as long as I can, and then I'm gonna pass it to them. The way that our folks before us carried it as long as they could, and then now it's a new generation of folks like you and Chris Stewart and Justin Miller, and they're gonna carry it as long as they can, and then hopefully they pass it to somebody else. So I think that's the only thing we can do is do our part. Keep our shoulder to the wheel. Keep grinding it out every day and fighting for justice every day. And then we'll be able to hopefully say, job well done. We did our part, and then pass it to the folks after us. But I think this is our leg of the race, and we just got to keep fighting.
Well, dope, man. I appreciate you coming on, man. Real quick, can you just tell the folks how they can get in touch with you if they ever need you? civil or criminal.
Yeah. So my Instagram is Mike T Sterling. Mike T Sterling. My website is Dreyer Dreyer Sterling.com. So that's www.dreyersterling.com. And then you can always reach us at 470-354-0600.
All right, Mike. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast, and all our viewers and listeners. We'll see you in a few weeks.
All right. Thank you, Joe.